June 7, 1944. Canadian soldiers captured their first prisoners from the elite 12th SS Panzer Division near Caen. They expected hardened Wehrmacht veterans. Instead, they found teenagers, boys just 17 years old, born in 1926, with arrogant smirks and Germany's best equipment. Within hours, these boys would commit a massacre that sealed their fate. The Battle of Normandy would become a systematic extermination campaign. Over 20,000 indoctrinated children would be reduced to just 300 survivors in 77 days. Look at this photograph. Baby-faced teenagers in German uniforms. Helmets too large. Expressions mixing defiance and exhaustion. Behind them, barely visible in smoke, a Panther tank with 80mm frontal armor and a 75mm gun effective to 2,000 meters. This was what confronted Canadian soldiers on June 7, 1944, near Authy and Buren. They'd expected battle-hardened Wehrmacht veterans. They found children. The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division had pushed inland from Juno Beach. What they got was a counterattack that shouldn't have been possible. The soldiers firing at them, commanding those massive Panthers, had been born in 1926. They were 17 years old. Boys who should have been finishing school were instead operating war machines with 80mm frontal armor and 75mm guns. Weapons that could destroy a Sherman tank from distances the Allied crews couldn't even return fire. This was the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. They arrived in Normandy with equipment that would make any military commander envious. 81 Panther tanks, 78 Panzer IV, superior technology in every category. But the hands operating these weapons belonged to teenagers who'd received rush training measured in months, not years. Their commanders, Fritz Witt, born 1908, and Kurt Panzermeier, age 33, were Eastern Front veterans who'd transformed Hitler Youth rallies into military units. They replaced camping songs with combat doctrine. The first 48 hours proved the paradox was lethal. These inexperienced teenagers inflicted 1,200 Canadian casualties through sheer aggression and fanaticism. The North Nova Scotia Highlanders and Royal Winnipeg Rifles found themselves pinned down by an enemy that fought with suicidal intensity. One Canadian officer captured the disbelief. They fought like fanatics. They held their positions until the last man was killed. This wasn't tactical sophistication. This was ideological fervor translated into combat effectiveness. Boys who at age 10 had been taught that Adolf Hitler was their god, that dying for Germany was the highest honor, now proved they'd internalized every word. They attacked when they should have retreated. They held positions that should have been abandoned. They turned the calculus of warfare on its head, not through skill, but through a willingness to die that veteran soldiers couldn't match. But the Canadians' shock would turn to horror within hours, because these teenagers hadn't just been trained to fight. They'd been taught that mercy was weakness, that the rules of war didn't apply to the master race. And on June 7th and 8th, they would prove it in the most brutal way possible. Pull back to 1933. Nuremberg. Tens of thousands of boys stand in perfect formation. Torches turn night into day. Voices rise in unison beneath towering swastika banners. This wasn't a military parade. It was a Hitler Youth rally. The boys singing weren't soldiers. Not yet. They were 10 years old. For the children born in 1926, the ones who would become the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, Adolf Hitler wasn't just a political leader. He was the only leader they'd ever known. From age 7, they were enrolled in the Hitler Youth. From age 10, they attended weekend camps where they learned map reading, orienteering, small unit tactics, military skills disguised as outdoor adventure. They participated in book burnings, cheering as degenerate literature went up in flames. They performed quasi-military drills with wooden rifles. Their childhood play transformed into preparation for war. By the time these boys reached 17, they'd spent more time in Hitler Youth uniform than in civilian clothes. As one Canadian interrogator would later report, their father was Germany. Their god was Adolf Hitler. They didn't just believe in the cause. They couldn't imagine anything else. In early 1943, Hitler ordered the creation of a Panzer division from these true believers. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend would be composed entirely of Hitler Youth members born in 1926. 17-year-olds who had been indoctrinated for a decade. But fanaticism alone doesn't win battles. These boys needed leaders. Hitler gave them the hardest killers the Eastern Front had produced. Fritz Witt, born 1908. Knight's Cross recipient from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Kurt Meyer, age 33, who'd earned the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross through aggressive armored tactics in Russia. Panzermeyer, they called him. These weren't teachers. They were veterans who'd learned warfare in the brutality of the Eastern Front, now assigned to transform fanatical children into soldiers. Meyer's command philosophy became the division's creed: victory or death. The enemy must be beaten, even if it costs us our lives. It wasn't a motivational slogan. It was a prediction. The division received Germany's best equipment: 20,540 men, 81 Panther tanks with 80mm Glacis armor, and 75mm KWK 42 L70 guns, 78 Panzerfuß, 48 howitzers. The Panthers could reach 46 km per hour on roads, though cross-country speed dropped to 24 km per hour. Their 40mm side armor made them vulnerable from flanking attacks. On paper, it was a formidable force. But training was rushed. Only months instead of the year standard for panzer divisions. The emphasis wasn't on tactical sophistication. It was on aggression, on never retreating, on fighting until death. By late May 1944, some units received batches of experimental MP-44 assault rifles for evaluation in July. By May 1944, the division was positioned southeast of Caen, designated as a mobile fire brigade reserve to counter Allied breakthroughs. The boys were eager, arrogant, convinced of their superiority. They were about to meet reality and commit the crime that would ensure their annihilation. June 7, 1944. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend counterattacked. They hit the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division and British forces at Authy, Buren, and Puteaux-en-Bessin. The ferocity shocked Allied veterans. These teenagers fought with suicidal aggression. In 48 hours, they inflicted 1,200 Canadian casualties. Canadian accounts expressed disbelief. They fought like fanatics. They held their positions until the last man was killed. The North Nova Scotia Highlanders and Royal Winnipeg Rifles suffered devastating losses. Major General R.F.L. Keller of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division watched his units get shredded by 17-year-olds who genuinely preferred death to retreat. For a brief moment, it seemed the Nazi indoctrination had created unstoppable soldiers. Teenage boys who didn't understand self-preservation. Kurt Meyer personally led counterattacks, his Panthers smashing through Canadian positions with the same aggressive tactics he'd used in Russia. But in the midst of this tactical success, the Hitlerjugend committed an act that would transform the entire campaign from a military battle into a war of annihilation. June 7th to 8th, 1944. Ardenne Abbey, a medieval monastery with stone walls that had stood for centuries near Caen. Inside those walls, something happened that would seal the fate of 20,000 German teenagers. 20 Canadian soldiers stood in the Abbey's garden. They'd been captured during the fighting at Authy and Buren. Their captors were boys from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, 17 years old. Some still had the arrogant smirks that Canadian witnesses described from earlier in the day. They'd been taught since age 10 that mercy was weakness, that the enemy deserved no quarter. The executions were methodical. Single shots to the back of the head, one by one. The bodies were left where they fell, among the flowers and hedges of what had been a peaceful monastery garden. By June 8th, 20 Canadian prisoners were dead. Not killed in combat. Murdered after surrender. When word reached Allied command, something fundamental changed. These weren't misguided children anymore. They weren't even enemy combatants. They were war criminals. Therefore, the response would be total. Major General R.F.L. Keller reported the massacre up the chain of command. The message that came back was clear. There would be no quarter, no sympathy. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend had just become a priority target for every weapon system the Allies possessed. Do the math. 20 murdered prisoners. Over the next 77 days, approximately 20,000 German teenagers would die fighting in Normandy. A 1 to 1,000 ratio of crime to consequence. Whether that was justice or mathematics doesn't matter. It's what happened. Canadian soldiers who'd initially felt strange pity seeing these baby-faced enemies now saw something else. These weren't children to be saved from Hitler's ideology. They were dangerous true believers who had to be destroyed systematically. The Ardenne Abbey massacre transformed Allied strategy. Before June 7th, the 12th SS was simply another German division to be defeated. After June 8th, they were marked for annihilation. British artillery units received orders to prioritize 12th SS positions. Soon they'd be firing 10,000 shells per day at sectors where the Hitlerjugend was dug in. RAF Typhoon squadrons began flying dedicated missions against the division. Royal Navy battleships offshore adjusted their fire plans. The boys who committed those murders thought they were the hunters, superior soldiers eliminating inferior enemies. They were about to discover what it meant to be hunted by an industrial war machine that could bring more firepower to bear in a single afternoon than the entire Wehrmacht possessed in a month. The massacre sealed their fate. Now came the grinding. The sound came first. A constant rolling thunder that never stopped. British 25-pounder guns firing 12-kilogram shells at 24 rounds per minute. Then the whine of Typhoon engines overhead. Then the earth-shaking crack of 60-pound rocket warheads slamming into positions. And every few minutes, a different sound entirely. The deep, apocalyptic boom of 16-inch naval guns from HMS Rodney offshore. Shells weighing 929 kilograms, nearly a ton of high explosive, arcing through the sky before obliterating entire command posts. This was what it meant to fight the Allies in Normandy. Not soldier against soldier. Not tank against tank. This was industrial annihilation. Imagine being 17 years old, crouched in a foxhole near Caen, unable to see your enemy, unable to counterattack, unable to do anything except endure. The ground shakes. The air fills with dirt and smoke. Your ears ring from concussions. And it doesn't stop. During major offensives like Operation Epsom and Operation Charnwood, British and Canadian artillery fired up to 10,000 shells per day at 12th SS positions. 10,000. That's a shell landing somewhere in your sector every 8 seconds. 24 hours a day. And when the artillery paused, the aircraft came. RAF Typhoons and American fighter bombers averaged 60 sorties daily against the division's sector. They dropped over 500 tons of bombs per week. Those RP-3 rockets with 60-pound warheads could penetrate tank armor from above. Your Panther's thick frontal armor meant nothing when death came from the sky. On June 14, 1944, near Versen, one of those massive naval shells found Fritz Witt's divisional headquarters. The 36-year-old Eastern Front veteran simply ceased to exist. No heroic last stand. No tactical brilliance. Just obliterated by a shell fired from a battleship he couldn't even see, miles offshore. Therefore, the Allies' strategy became clear. As one British officer put it, "You couldn't outfight fanaticism. You had to crush it." The 12th SS wasn't an opponent to be defeated. It was a problem to be eliminated. Their courage didn't matter. Their superior Panthers didn't matter. Their willingness to die didn't matter. The Allies had transformed this into mathematics. Tonnage of explosives multiplied by rate of fire equals dead teenagers. No glory. No victory. Just systematic destruction. Kurt Meyer, now commanding after Witt's death, watched his division being ground down by forces they couldn't engage. His aggressive counterattack doctrine, his tactical brilliance, all irrelevant against an enemy who simply stood back and called in coordinates. More artillery, more aircraft, more naval guns. But firepower alone wasn't enough. The Allies had another weapon that would prove even more devastating. They could starve the division of everything it needed to fight. And that's exactly what they did. The Panther sat motionless in the Norman hedgerow. Its long 75mm gun pointed uselessly at the sky. Inside, 5 teenage boys, none older than 18, listened to the whine of Typhoon engines circling overhead. They had one of Germany's most advanced tanks. 80mm glacis armor. 40mm side armor. A gun that could kill a Sherman at 2,000 meters. The most technologically sophisticated armored vehicle Germany had ever built. And they couldn't move. The transmission had failed 3 days ago. They'd radioed for parts. No response. They'd requested recovery. No vehicles available. Now they just waited. Watched the aircraft circle. Knew what came next. 60-pound rockets that struck from above, where their armor was thinnest. This was the Panther's fatal flaw. On paper, it was superior to every Allied tank in Normandy. In reality, it was a mechanical nightmare. The bocage mud clogged its tracks. The narrow roads broke its transmissions. Its high silhouette made it a perfect target. Its 46 kilometers per hour road speed dropped to 24 kilometers per hour cross-country. And there were no replacements. Between June and August 1944, the division received exactly 12 replacement tanks against losses of 140, a replacement rate of 8.5%. Many Panthers never reached combat. They broke down during movement, their chronic transmission failures turning advanced weapons into abandoned steel coffins. But it wasn't just the Panthers breaking down. The entire supply system was collapsing. Allied aircraft had turned every road into a killing ground. By July, 70% of German supply convoys were being destroyed before they reached the front lines. Therefore, the division was forced to move only at night. They crept forward in darkness while Allied artillery hammered their positions around the clock. Operational flexibility, the entire reason panzer divisions existed, simply disappeared. The ammunition situation became catastrophic. By late July, tank crews reported less than 20 rounds per vehicle. 20 rounds. Some Panthers in Normandy had fired more than that in a single engagement back in June. Infantry companies ran out of grenades, then rifle ammunition. Artillery batteries rationed shells like gold. And the fuel. The fuel was worse. Deliveries dropped to providing enough for only 20 kilometers of movement. 20 kilometers. Not enough to execute a proper counterattack. Not enough to reposition effectively. Barely enough to retreat. The most mobile force in the German army was being starved into immobility. Meanwhile, The Allies just kept firing. 10,000 artillery shells per day, hammering 12th SS positions during major offensives. 60 air sorties daily. 500 tons of bombs per week. The teenagers, with their superior equipment, couldn't shoot back at aircraft. Couldn't counter battery fire against artillery positions miles away. Couldn't engage battleships firing from the channel. The division received fewer than 1,000 replacement soldiers after initial losses, against losses exceeding 19,000 men. A 5% replacement rate. The mathematics were undeniable. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was bleeding to death. They couldn't maneuver, couldn't resupply, couldn't replace their losses. Meyer's aggressive tactics meant nothing when his tanks had no fuel and his infantry had no ammunition. But the worst was yet to come. The Allies were about to close the trap completely. Carpiquet Airfield, July 1944. The runway, once concrete, had become a moonscape of overlapping craters. Burning Panzer IVs sent black smoke columns into the sky. In the rubble of hangars, Canadian infantry from the 3rd Division advanced through a fog of cordite and dust. Teenage SS soldiers fired from behind twisted metal and shattered walls. This wasn't the dramatic armored clash of June 7th. This was something worse. Industrial attrition. The slow, grinding destruction of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. One artillery barrage at a time. The battles around Caen throughout June and July, Operation Epsom, June 26th to 30, Operation Charnwood, July 8th to 9th, Operation Goodwood, July 18 to 20, weren't decisive victories. They were a meat grinder. Every building became a potential defensive position. Every defensive position became a target for overwhelming firepower. British and Canadian guns fired 10,000 shells per day at their positions. RAF Typhoons averaged 60 sorties daily. And through it all, the teenage SS soldiers held. They counterattacked. They died in place rather than retreat. And they inflicted horrific casualties doing it. The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division suffered 700 killed and 2,000 wounded specifically fighting the 12th SS during this period. British 3rd and 59th Infantry Divisions incurred approximately 2,000 casualties. These engagements became among the costliest Allied infantry battles in Normandy. Units that had landed on Juno Beach with confidence were shattered against positions held by 17-year-olds who simply would not break. One Canadian officer's report captured the terrible reality. They fought like fanatics. They held their positions until the last man was killed. But fanaticism couldn't stop mathematics. Every shell, every rocket, every naval gun barrage that the teenage soldiers survived, their division died a little more. The division suffered over 1,200 casualties in the initial June 7th to 8th engagements. Then over 3,000 casualties around Caen in June-July. Irreplaceable losses. Because between June and August, the division received exactly 1,000 replacement soldiers against losses exceeding 19,000 men. Tank strength. 150 Panthers and Panzer IVs in June had been cut by over 90% by late July. Not primarily from combat. From mechanical breakdowns, lack of spare parts, and fuel shortages. Those magnificent Panthers sat immobilized in hedgerows, abandoned when their transmissions failed and there were no replacements. The Hitler Youth boys who had counterattacked with such shocking ferocity on June 7th were now exhausted, depleted, clinging to positions they couldn't abandon because Meyer's doctrine allowed no retreat. They were being systematically ground down by an enemy who had learned the terrible lesson. You didn't need to outfight these fanatics. You just needed to outlast them. The battles around Caen had bled the 12th SS white. But the division still existed. Still fought. Still held its positions with suicidal determination. Therefore, the Allies needed a final solution. In August, they would get one. The Falaise Pocket, where the remnants of Hitler's baby division would be trapped and systematically annihilated. August 1944. Look at the maps. The Allied pincers. Canadian forces from the north, American forces from the south are closing. Inside the shrinking pocket near Falaise, the remnants of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend are trapped. The noose is tightening. What happens next isn't a battle. It's systematic extermination. Imagine the conditions inside that pocket. Every Allied weapon system in Normandy is focused on this single killing ground. British artillery crews fire 10,000 shells per day into the encirclement. RAF Typhoons circle overhead in relays, 60 sorties daily. Their 60-pound rocket warheads slamming into anything that moves. American fighter bombers strafe the roads with 50 caliber machine guns. And still, every few minutes the apocalyptic boom of naval guns from offshore. Shells that weigh nearly a ton. The roads become impassable. Burning Panthers and Panzer IVs block every intersection. Dead horses from supply wagons rot in the August heat. Bodies lie in ditches, on roadsides, crushed into the mud by tank treads. One survivor would later describe it as a landscape from hell. Constant explosions, screaming wounded, the smell of burning flesh and gasoline mixing together until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. There are no escape routes. Allied forces have sealed every gap. Kurt Meyer, commanding the division since Fritz Witt's death in June, knows his orders. Hold the pocket open. Allow other German units to escape. It's a suicide mission dressed up as tactics. The division's fanaticism, once channeled into aggressive attacks, now serves only to prolong the agony. Meyer leads a desperate breakout attempt. The remaining Panthers, maybe 30 still operational, form a spearhead. Teenage grenadiers follow on foot. They attack with the same suicidal aggression they showed at Authie and Buren in June. But this time, they're not facing surprise Canadians on the beaches. They're charging into prepared positions backed by overwhelming firepower. The breakout fails. Then fails again. And again. Approximately 6,000 soldiers of the 12th SS are killed or captured in the Falaise Pocket alone. The roads become junkyards of destroyed vehicles and dead teenagers. Some units fight to the last man. Others surrender when their ammunition runs out. Most just die. By August 22nd, when the guns finally fall silent, the arithmetic is undeniable. The division that arrived in Normandy with 20,540 men and 150 tanks escapes with 300 men and 10 tanks, a 98.5% casualty rate. One of the most complete destructions of any military unit in history. The boys who had arrived in June with arrogant smirks and dreams of glory, who had executed Canadian prisoners and fought with fanatic determination, were dead, captured, or fleeing east as shattered survivors. The weapon forged in hate had been broken by industrial reality. Fanaticism, it turned out, was no match for an avalanche of high explosives. Look at two photographs. The first, Nuremberg, 1938. Rows of Hitler youth in crisp uniforms, standing at attention, eyes bright with certainty. Boys aged 12, 13, 14. The class of 1926. Their future stretches before them like a promise. The second, May 1945. A column of teenage SS prisoners. Faces hollow, uniforms filthy and torn. The same generation. 7 years and a world of suffering later. What happened to these boys? The answer is written in numbers that should haunt us. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend entered Normandy with over 20,000 men. By August 22, 1944, only 300 remained. But that's just the beginning of the accounting. Approximately 8,000 killed, 5,000 wounded, 7,000 captured or missing. A generation, Boys who at age 10 were taught Hitler was their god, who at 17 were given tanks and told to die for the Reich, fed systematically into the furnace of industrial war by a regime that knew it was dying and didn't care. The division was rebuilt, of course. The name was too valuable to discard. By December 1944, enough replacements had been scraped together to send the 12th SS into the Battle of the Bulge. But these weren't the original boys. Those teenagers, the true believers who had sung songs about dying for Germany in 1943, who had fought with suicidal determination at Caen, were mostly dead or in Allied prison camps. The rebuilt division was a ghost wearing a familiar uniform, a shadow of what had been destroyed in Normandy. When the final surrender came in May 1945, the photographs tell the story better than any battle report. Compare them to June 1944. The arrogant pride transformed to exhausted defeat. Visual evidence of what happens when ideology meets industrial reality. They had believed they were superior, racially, morally, militarily. They had some of Germany's best equipment. They had been indoctrinated since childhood to never surrender, never retreat, never question. None of it mattered. Because here's what makes the story of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend different from every other SS division. Their legacy isn't post-war manhunts for aging war criminals. It's the profound tragedy of a stolen generation. Boys who never had a chance to choose differently. Who were shaped from age 10 into weapons. Who believed every lie they were told. And who paid for those lies with their lives. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was supposed to be Germany's future. Instead, they became its final sacrifice. Proof that no amount of indoctrination, no level of fanaticism, no superiority of equipment can overcome the simple mathematics of industrial war. 20 Canadian prisoners executed at Ardenne Abbey. 20,000 German teenagers dead 77 days later. From 20,540 men and 150 tanks to 300 survivors and 10 operational vehicles. A 98.5% casualty rate that stands as one of the most complete destructions of any military unit in history. The hunters became the harvest. The future became the past. And 20,000 teenagers learned the hardest lesson in history. Ideology dies quickly under the weight of artillery shells. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more fascinating World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.